Our today's topic is found to be very important because in our today's topic, we are going to highlight the temperature and the pressure belts of the earth. And this topic is also very much important because from this topic, a number of the questions appear in UGC NET exam, and also in the UPSC and different state and the central government examination. So this topic is found to be very important, and our today's topic is temperature and the pressure belts of the earth. Hello everyone. So that what is the temperature belt of the earth? If you just go through the concept of the temperature belt of the earth, so here we are finding out three important temperature zone. One is the torrid zone, so this is the torrid zone. Another one is the temperate zone. This is the temperate, and the last one is the frigid zone, and this is frigid. Now, what is the latitudinal extension of these three zones? If I come to torrid zone, if you just go to that area, this is the equator. So the value is 0 degree. And from 0 degree to 30 degree, just approximately 30 degree north and 30 degree south, whatever the zone is extended, that particular zone is known as the torrid zone. So that term torrid is itself indicating, and the latitudinal extension is also indicating that from 0 to 30 degree north and 30 degree south, this zone is found to be very much warmer. Why warmer? Because the solar radiation falls directly in that area. And the other reason is that the sun shines vertically throughout the year from 30 degree north to 30 degree south. So that is the zone which is known as the torrid. So automatically torrid is that zone where the temperature is found to be high. From 30 degree north to approx 66 and half degree north and 66 and half degree south, from 30 degree north to 66 and half degree north and 30 degree south to 66 and half degree south, the zone is extended. That zone is known as the temperate zone. Here the temperature condition is very much suitable. There is no direct solar radiation over that particular place. The solar radiation is very much oblique in nature, and hence the temperature of that area is found to be moderate in nature, not very less, not very high. So the temperature is basically moderate in nature. Now if I come to that belt, that belt is known as the frigid zone. That frigid zone is extended from 66 and a half degree north to 90 degree north, which is known as the pole, and 66 and a half degree south to 90 degree south. So this zone is known as the frigid. The term itself is indicating that the temperature condition is found to be very less over this particular place. It means from 66 and a half degree north to 90 degree north and 66 and a half degree south to 90 degree south. This zone is the frigid zone where the temperature is found to be very less. So these are the three major temperature zone on the earth. One is the torrid, second one is the temperate, and third one is the frigid. Okay, now I will be discussing how this temperature belts actually originates, or what is the origination mechanism of these belts. Now, if I come to the equatorial belt, so it is 0 degree. 0 degree is that area where the solar radiation falls directly onto the surface. So the sun shines vertically throughout the year over that particular place. So what will happen? The air will become, the surrounding air will become very much warm and hot in nature, and they will move in the upward direction. Just like this figure. So if you come to that equatorial low pressure belt, this area, this equatorial low pressure belt, in that equatorial low pressure belt, the sun shines vertically throughout the year, and due to that reason, the temperature condition is found to be very high, and this is the area from where the air is moving in the upward direction, and it is after the condensation process, and after the condensation process, it is forming the cloud cover. So, due to that reason, over this equatorial region, precipitation in the form of the rainfall is a regular phenomena during the time of the evening and afternoon. So, what happens? It means over the equatorial region, since the solar radiation falls directly, so the air becomes very much warmer and hot in nature, and that hot air becomes lighter, and that air moves in the upward direction. So automatically there will be a gap, or there will be a vacuum that will be generated, and because of that vacuum, there will be generation of the low pressure, and hence the air is moving in the upward direction. So after the condensation process, because the temperature of the air will be declining at the rate of 10 degrees C per kilometer, which is known as the dry adiabatic lapse rate. So the temperature of the ascending air will fall at the rate of 10 degrees C per kilometer, and after that, that air will be condensed to form this cloud. Now, what is the name of the process? The name of the process is convection. Is the convection. So, if the question is asked that under which process the air is moving in the upward direction, the answer will be convection. Due to the convectional process, the air is actually moving from the ground surface to the upward direction to form this cloud cover. Okay. Now, why it happens? It happens because of the direct solar radiation throughout the year. Okay. Now, due to that phenomena, majority of our equatorial rainforest, this is Amazon and this is Congo, majority of the equatorial rainforest are basically generated over this particular place. So hence the equator is moving like this, the value is 0 degree, so automatically there will be higher amount of precipitation in the form of the rainfall, and that rainfall will be responsible for the luxurious growth of vegetation over this particular place. Maybe in South America, in Africa, in the South America it is known as Amazon, in Africa it is known as Congo, and in the part of the South and Southeast Asia there will be also the growth of the luxurious vegetation, such as in Indonesia, in Singapore there is a luxurious growth of vegetation. Even our southern part of India, most particularly the Kerala, and of course our neighboring country Sri Lanka, that also face a huge amount of the rainfall because of its close proximity of the equatorial region. So, due to that reason, Sri Lanka and Kerala are marked by the luxurious growth of the vegetation, which is basically equatorial rainforest in character. So, what is the name of the forest? The name of the forest is the equatorial rainforest ecosystem. Equatorial rainforest ecosystem. Why the known is equatorial? Because this forest is grown near the equator from 0 degree to 5 degree north and south. This is the latitudinal extension of this forest, equatorial rainforest. And why it is known as the rainforest? Because all the time there is a luxurious growth of the vegetation. For that reason, it is known as the equatorial rainforest. Besides that, this forest is entirely depending on the rainfall for its growth, so it is known as the equatorial rainforest. Okay, so this is the zone, this Amazon area, this Congo area, and the area of the Southeast Asia. So that actually face huge amount of the rainfall because of the higher temperature, because the solar radiation falls directly on that area and the air moves in the upward direction, and ultimately it creates the rainfall, and simultaneously it is forming the major forest area in the world. Okay, now, if I come to the next area, so what is the equatorial area? Equatorial zone is that zone where there is a direct fall of the solar radiation and the air is moving in the upward direction. Now, I am coming to the next point. Since the equatorial region is getting the higher amount of the rainfall, after the equatorial region, there is a particular zone which is known as the tropical zone. So, it is known as the tropical zone. Tropical zone is extended from 0 degree to 23.5 degree north and south. Maybe the zone is from 30 degree north and south. So from 0 degree to approximately 30 degree north and south, that zone is extended, and that zone is known as the tropical region. Okay. Now, if I go to the diagram of the tropical areas, so this is the area subtropical high pressure belt. So this is the zone which is known as the tropical belt. Now, I must also discuss about this tropical zone. So, if I come to the entire cross section of the entire globe, so if this is my equator, I am writing here 30-degree north and I am writing here 30-degree south. From 0 degree to 30-degree north and from 0 degree to 30-degree south, this entire zone is known as the tropical zone. This entire zone is known as the tropical zone. Now, from the equatorial region, the air moves in the upward direction. So, why the air is moving in the upward direction? Because of the direct solar radiation. The air becomes lighter in nature because of its warmness. So, the air is moving in the upward direction. Now, once the air is moving in the upward direction, that air, after ascending to a certain height, maybe 10 kilometer, maybe 12 kilometer, maybe 15 kilometer, after that ascent, the air will be obstructed by the presence of tropopause. Tropopause. That is the last layer of the troposphere, and it is the making the boundary between troposphere and stratosphere. So that rising air will be obstructed by the tropopause. After being obstructed, this air will be bifurcated into two directions. Since that air has been obstructed by the tropopause, so that air is bifurcated into two directions. One part is moving from 0 degree to 30-degree south, another air is moving from 0 degree to 30-degree north. This air, this air will ultimately fall on this area, will fall ultimately on this area. However, I want to extend my lecture from this part as well. After 30-degree north and 30-degree south, there is another zone 66 and half degree south and 66 and half degree north. So what happens? From the equator, why the air is moving in the upward direction? Because of the high temperature. Because of the high temperature. Now from 60 degree south and 60 degree 66 and half degree north. So from 66 and half degree south and from 66 and half degree north also, the air is moving in the upward direction. But from this place, why the air is moving in the upward direction? Because of the rotation of the earth. Because of the rotation of the earth. Since the rotational movement of the earth is found to be very high over that particular place, so the air is totally deflected from the body of the earth and it is moving in the upward direction. So just listen. From the equator, why the air is moving in the upward direction? Because of the high temperature. Similarly, from 66 and half and from 66 and half in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere, the air is moving in the upward direction. But here, because of no due to high temperature, because here the temperature is less in this place and this place, but still the air is moving in the upward direction. Why? Because of the rotation of the earth. So in the equator, since the air is moving in the upward direction, so there will be generation of low pressure. So if I go to the diagram, this zone is known as the equatorial low pressure belt. This zone is known as the equatorial low pressure belt. If you come to another diagram, this zone is known as the equatorial low pressure belt, which is known as the which is also known as the ITCZ. Okay, however, if I again go to that diagram of the cross section, in that cross section part, okay, so this zone is known as the equatorial low pressure belt. Equatorial low pressure belt. Okay. Now from 66 and south and 66 and half north, the air has moved in the upward direction, and after rising to a certain height, it will also be obstructed by the tropopause. Okay. This air will also be bifurcated into two directions. One part of the air is moving from 66 and a half degrees south to 30 degrees south this year. And here also the air is moving from 66 and a half degree north to 30 degree north. And another part of the air is moving from 66 and a half degree south to 90 degree south. It means towards the pole. And here also the wind will be moving towards the 90 degree north. It means towards the pole. Okay. Now, this is the zone where this wind, it means the wind in the upper atmosphere which is moving from the equator to the 30 degree south, and in the upper atmosphere the air which is moving from 66 and half south, that is moving from the 30 degree south, that air will be converging over here, and after the convergence this air will come downward. Okay. Now, since the air is moving in the upward direction from 66 and half south and 66 and half north, this zone will also be known as the low pressure belt. So, this zone will also be known as the low pressure belt. This low pressure belt will be known as the subpolar low pressure belt. Why it is known as the subpolar low pressure belt? Because this zone is located closer to the polar region. So, that area is known as the subpolar zone. Subpolar low pressure belt. Okay. Now, since the air is moving from upward to downward direction, there will be the formation of high pressure. So, another essence is that when the air moves from uh, below portion to upward portion, there will be the generation of the low pressure, and if the air moves from the higher elevation to lower elevation, there will be generation of high pressure. So near the 30 degree south and near 30 degree north, if I draw the diagram over here also, the air is moving in the downward direction. So here also there will be the high pressure system. So in that zone, there will be also high pressure, which is known as the subtropical high pressure belt. Subtropical high pressure belt. Subtropical high pressure belt. Okay. If I draw the diagram once again, this is the cross section. This is 0 degree. The air is moving in the upward direction. It is being obstructed by the tropopause, bifurcating into two direction. Here is the 30 degree south and here is the 30 degree north. And from 66 and half degree south and 66 and half degree north, the air is also moving in the upward direction. It is also being bifurcated, and it is converging over here, and ultimately it is descending on the tropical areas. So this is low pressure zone, this is high pressure zone, this is low pressure, this is high pressure, and this is low pressure. Okay, so the conclusion is that if the air moves in the upward direction, there will be low pressure. If the air moves from the upward portion to downward portion, there will be the generation of the high pressure. Okay, now this low pressure belt is being originated because of the high temperature, because the sun shines vertically throughout the year over this place. So this low pressure is thermally induced low pressure. It is thermally induced low pressure. And this low pressure is being generated because of the movement of the earth. So that low pressure is known as the dynamically induced low pressure. Dynamically induced low pressure. This zone and this zone. Dynamically induced low pressure. Okay. Now, this air will be obstructed by the tropopause and it is moving towards 90 degrees south, and here the air will be moving towards 90 degree north. Now this air will further fall over this particular place over 90 degree north and 90 degree south to form a high pressure belt. To form a high pressure belt. Here, over the 90-degree north and 90-degree south, the high pressure is generating because of the two reasons. One reason is the because of the downward movement of the air. Due to that reason, there is the formation of the high pressure over this place, and over this place. And another reason is that because of the very low temperature, because of the very low temperature. So near the pole, because of the very low temperature, there is a formation of the high pressure belt. But we have to remember that over 30-degree south and 30-degree north, there is a formation of high pressure not because of the low temperature. Here the high pressure is forming because the air is descending from the upward to downward direction. Okay. Since this is the air system of the entire globe. Now, if I go to the detailed discussion of the air system, so just have a look of the pressure belt of the Earth. Since this is the equatorial low pressure belt, this is the subtropical high pressure belt, this is subpolar low pressure belt, and this is polar high pressure belt. This part is repeated in the southern hemisphere, so these are the repetitions. Okay. Now, if I go to another discussion, the color is not visible. If I change the color, okay. So since this is the equator, this is 30 north, 30 south, this 30-degree north, you can also write 23 and half north, 23 and half south, 66 and half degree south, 66 and half degree north. Here it is 90 degrees south, and here it is 90-degree north. Okay, now the air is moving, it is being obstructed by the tropopause, it is moving like this. From here also the air is moving in the upward direction. It is obstructed by the tropopause and it will converge over here. It will converge over here and it will descend. And it will be descending over here. Now, after the descending over this particular place, it means on 30-degree north and 30-degree south, after this descending, the air will move in the equatorial direction and towards the direction of 66 and half north and south. So after the descendant of the air, it means the air is moving, this part is moving towards the equator and this part is moving towards the temperate belt. It means towards the 66 and half south and 66 and half north. However, the air which is moving from 30-degree south to equator and 30-degree north to equator, that air is known as the trade wind. That air is known as the trade wind. Okay. Now, on the basis of the direction, that trade wind will be named differently. In the northern hemisphere, we have to remember that thing that in the northern hemisphere, because of the Coriolis force, the wind is deflected towards the right hand direction. So the direction of the air becomes northeasterly. And in the southern hemisphere, also because of the Coriolis force, the wind is deflected towards left, so the direction becomes southeasterly. Okay, now if I go to the diagram of this one, so this trade wind is moving from the northeastern direction, and that trade wind is moving from the southeastern direction. Just have a look of this diagram. This trade wind is moving from the northeastern direction and that trade wind is moving from the southeastern direction. So we are getting two direction of the trade wind. Okay. Now the another very interesting thing is that this wind is known as the trade wind. Okay. So in the northern hemisphere we can write it is the northeastern trade wind and it is the southeast trade wind. So if the question comes why the wind direction is deflected, it is because of the Coriolis force. However, now if this wind is known as the trade wind, the wind which is opposite in direction of the trade wind. Trade wind is moving from 30 degree south to 0 degree and 30 degree north to 0 degree. and the wind in the upper atmosphere, the direction is just opposite to the trade wind. So that wind will be known as the anti-trade, anti-trade, anti-trade. Okay. Now another part of the wind that is moving from 30 degrees south to 66 and half and 30-degree north to 66 and half north. That wind is known as the westerlies. That wind is known as the westerlies. Now, based on the Coriolis force, again in the northern hemisphere, the direction will be changed towards right, and in the southern hemisphere, the direction will be changed towards left. Now, if I go to the diagram of this westerly wind, just look at the diagram of the westerly wind. Here, the wind is moving towards right. So it will be known as the southwest westerlies because the wind is moving from the southwestern direction. Okay, we have to look onto the direction from where the wind is coming. So the wind is coming from the southwestern direction, so it will be known as the southwest westerlies. And here the wind is coming from the northwestern direction, so it will be known as the northwest westerlies. Okay. Now, if you just move this chart, it means this downward part to the upward part. And if you follow this from this part, so we have to look onto the direction of the wind from the windward side. It means if you follow the direction of the wind from this side, the wind is basically moving from the northeastern direction. Okay, so here the direction is from the southwestern part, and here the direction is from the northwestern part. Okay, so northwest westerlies and southwest westerlies. Okay, so if this wind is known as the westerly wind, so automatically the wind which is opposite in direction of the westerly wind, that will be known as the anti-westerlies. So that will be known as the anti-westerlies. Okay, now the wind which is moving from 66 and half south to 90 south and 66 and half north to 90 north, it means towards the pole, that wind is known as polar wind. That wind is known as polar wind. But I have given a wrong direction. Why the direction is wrong? Because here the wind is moving in the upward direction, so it will be obstructed by the tropopause and that wind will fall over the pole, and after descending onto the pole the wind will basically move towards this direction, so not in this direction. So the wind direction will be from 90-degree north to 66 and half north, and from 90-degree south to 66 and half degree south. All of you, I hope all of you can understand. So this wind is moving from the polar region to 66 and half south and 66 and half north. This wind is known as polar wind. Okay, now just look at the direction of this polar wind. This is the polar easterlies. Since this wind is coming from the northeastern direction, so it is known as the northeast polar wind. And from this direction also you can identify this is the southeast polar wind. Okay, so we have to be very careful in the identification of direction of these winds. Okay, now if this is the polar wind, the direction of this wind is just the reverse of the polar wind, so it is known as the anti-polar wind. So that wind is known as the anti-polar wind. So this wind will be known as the anti-polar wind. Okay, now if you come to that belt, Okay, so from this part, we can have a very wonderful discussion that this region, if you come to this region, so this is going to be our polar belt, and if you also come to the part of the Antarctica, this is also going to be our polar belt. And this part is our equatorial zone where the temperature is found to be very high, and this zone is known as the temperate belt. This zone is known as the temperate belt. Okay, now if I go to the further discussion of that cross section, if I go to that cross section, again it is 0 degree, the air is moving, it is bifurcated, it is moving in the downward direction like this. It is 30 north and it is 30 south, it is 66 and a half south, 66 and a half north, and it is 90 south and it is 90 north. So I am just making the direction of the wind. So you have to be very careful during the drawing of the wind direction. So hence the wind direction is like this. So this wind is known as the trade wind. This is trade, and this is known as the anti-trade. Anti-trade, and if this is westerlies, westerlies, this is also westerlies. So this will become my anti-westerlies. Okay. Now, if this is my polar wind, so this will become my anti-polar wind. Anti-polar wind. Okay. Now, just go to that areas. It means we have to be very careful on this area. On that particular area, 66 and half north, there is a convergence of the two different types of the air. One air that is coming from 30-degree north, the same thing is happening in the southern hemisphere. The wind is coming from 30-degree south, and another wind that is coming from the polar region, it means from 90-degree north and from 90-degree south, the air is moving towards 66 half north and 66 and half south respectively. And over that place, these two different charactered wind, it means one wind is coming from the pole, so that wind is very much cool and very much cold, and this air is warm in nature because that air is coming from 30-degree north. Because of the convergence of the warm and cool air over this place, there will be the formation of the front, and because of the formation of the front, there will be one very important climatological phenomena that will be known as the temperate cyclone. That will be known as the temperate cyclone. And this belt is very much popular from the point of view of the formation of tropical cyclone. Tropical cyclone. This zone and this zone. Okay, so in my today's lecture, I have covered the wind direction and the pressure belt of the earth. In our next lecture, I will be discussing the different tricellular meridional circulation. Thank you all of you for your patience.